It was not, as Lord Peter Wimsey later observed, the sort of Tuesday upon which one expected to find a canon's niece spread-eagled in a rhododendron bush. Least of all at Thistlecombe Hall, which had always presented itself to the county with the sedate and floral aspect of a maiden aunt attending evensong. The skies had just turned that pale, unconvincing shade of blue peculiar to Devonshire in early April, and Wimsey, fresh from a tiresome weekend of Cambridge, Dawn's quarreling over the proper interpretation of a misplaced semicolon in the book of Common Prayer, had diverted himself into the country in search of, as he phrased it, a little air, a little awkwardness, and a great deal of undercooked trout. He got, instead, a corpse. Really, he said, squinting down at the rather awkward position of the deceased, one might almost think she jumped backwards into the shrubbery. A feat more difficult than it sounds, unless one is a particularly devout member of the Ballet's Russes or suffering from a violent distaste for pelargoniums. He made this observation aloud, to no one in particular. His valet, Bunter, stood at a respectful distance, notebook already in hand. The deceased Miss Euphemia Lutterworth, aged 28, unmarried, underpaid, and now, inconveniently, extremely dead, lay with one arm twisted unnaturally beneath her, the other extended as though in benediction or accusation. Her mouth was open in a soundless "oh," as though surprised by eternity. A single shoe, of modest Oxford make, was missing. She was engaged in cataloguing the Hall's antiquarian sermon collection, murmured the Hun Daphne Plimpton, the lady of the house, who had come upon the scene just as Wimsey was politely checking for a pulse he knew he wouldn't find. Very keen on Bishop Beveridge, such a serious young woman. Dull as snowmalt, if I'm honest. Wimsey raised an eyebrow. Bishop Beveridge, eh? That's ambition for you. Bunter, take a note. Strong interest in 17th century ecclesiastical reform may be hazardous to one's health. He turned back to the unfortunate Euphemia and crouched low, frowning. No sign of violence, no blood, no obvious mischief. But she is quite indisputably dead, which complicates the cataloging, not to mention the supper arrangements. And one might also ask, he said, gesturing at the limp body, why Miss Lutterworth chose to die or be deposited precisely here, beneath Lady Plimpton's window. Lady Plimpton started. I never noticed. But yes, that is my window just above. How very odd. Oddness, said Wimsey lightly, is regrettably common among human beings, and distressingly frequent among theologians. Still, I dislike coincidences. They tend to end up with someone being poisoned. The local constable of Florid, perspiring. Man with an unfortunate mustache and a passionate fondness for underboiled eggs, was summoned. He took Wimsey's presence with the kind of resignation usually reserved for sudden toothaches and uninvited bishops. Her neck's not broken, Wimsey informed him, before the man could fumble too far with the body. And there's no sign of a struggle. But do take your time, Constable Sprake. We wouldn't want to make a hash of the local gossip. Sprake turned a vivid pink and began stammering something about preserving the dignity of the deceased, while Wimsey wandered a few paces away and stared thoughtfully at a long, low library wing half shuttered against the light. Tell me, he said suddenly, turning to Lady Plimpton, is the catalogue Miss Lutterworth was working on intact? Lady Plimpton blinked. I should think so. It was being done in the old study. Why? Oh, no reason, said Wimsey airily. Only that Miss Lutterworth's fingernails appear to be ink-stained, and yet there's not an inkpot to be seen. Odd, don't you think? He wandered off again, hands in his pockets, humming a line of Donne under his breath. Bunter watched him go with a practiced eye, then turned politely to the constable. Shall I fetch the coroner, sir? Sprake muttered to no one in particular. I should, said Bunter gravely. And perhaps the housekeeper, if I may say. So, sir, when Lord Peter starts quoting metaphysical poets at a corpse, it is usually a sign that matters are going to get inconvenient. And so it began, with a dead girl in a garden, a catalogue left incomplete, and Lord Peter Wimsey humming theology beneath a Devonshire sun. The first whispered gossip had already begun to curl its way through the tiled corridors of Thistlecombe Hall. By nightfall, someone would be lying. By the end of the week, someone else would wish they had. Bunter, with the air of one who had seen too many unpleasant discoveries to be either surprised or disturbed, stepped lightly into the dim study. With its tall, mullioned windows and the unmistakable smell of unemptied ashtrays, the scent of furniture polish fought gamely with the underlying damp of too many years of unopened books. He noted at once the presence of the catalogue in progress, an orderly ledger open upon a battered escritoire, flanked by a pile of brittle sermons bound in calfskin and bearing titles that promised, in heavy Gothic font, a reasonable defense of apostolic discipline and on the perils of papistical contagion. Ink blotches marred the ledger's margin, a spatter here, a long drag of the nib there, as though the writer's hand had faltered mid-sentence. A small inkwell, capped, stood beside the journal, along with a paperweight in the shape of a medieval bishop whose face, ironically, had chipped away. Bunter, ever unobtrusive, stooped slightly and sniffed the inkwell. The scent was faint, but acrid. The ink, perhaps, had recently been tampered with or diluted. He made a mental note. Meanwhile, in the garden below, Lord Peter had repositioned himself under a trellis quite as disapproving as the vicar's wife, and was conversing, or rather, gently coaxing, the housekeeper, a gaunt, angular woman in starched black who answered to the name of Mrs. Millet. She gave the impression of a woman who had been disappointed by the 20th century and was taking it out on the silver. She was a quiet sort, said Mrs. Millet, folding her hands over one another like the wings of a nervous crow. Kept to herself, never made trouble. Up with the dawn, always polite, but well, there was something too knowing in her eyes, if you'll pardon me saying so. I rarely pardon anything, said Wimsey, who was idly picking a leaf from the unfortunate pelargonium, but I will make a charitable exception for candor. You say she kept to herself. Did she have no confidants? No walks with the gardener? No quiet talks with the curate behind the potting shed? Certainly not, sniffed Mrs. Millet. She had no time for idle chatter, nor the sort of fancies that distract girls from their work. She had her papers and her books. I once caught her reading Thomas à Kempis in the scullery, of all places. Indeed, said Wimsey. Austere tastes, then. But a fondness for private places. One doesn't read the Imitation of Christ among the saucepans, unless one is either devout or hiding from someone. Mrs. Millet stiffened. Sir? Never. Mind, who was the last to see Miss Lutterworth alive, may I ask? The gardener's boy, I believe, Jonah Griggs. He brought in the compost just before lunch. A biblical name, mused Wimsey. Though I dare say this Jonah keeps fewer whales and more wheelbarrows. The boy, when fetched, proved to be a gangly youth with mud up to the knees and an expression of permanent apology. He shifted uneasily as Wimsey regarded him through his monocle. Tell me, my dear Jonah, when you last saw the late Miss Lutterworth, what was she doing? Writing, sir, same as always. Bent over them big old books. She didn't say nothing. Not even good day? She nodded. Sort of. She looked odd, sir. Odd in what way? Jonah's ears flushed. Like she was angry, but trying not to be. Her pen was scratching real fast, and she looked at me quick, then looked away. Wimsey pursed his lips. And when was this? Just before the bell. Maybe 12:10. Thank you, Jonah. You may go and resume your wrangling with the compost. As the boy slouched away, Wimsey looked up to find Bunter at his elbow, presenting a slip of folded paper with the solemnity of a communion wafer. If I may, my lord. Found in the wastebasket beneath the ledger. Wimsey unfolded it slowly. A torn scrap part of a letter, perhaps, in an unfamiliar hand. The ink had run in one corner as though dampened hastily. It read, "Cannot keep this up much longer. She suspects. If she finds out," there the message ended, ripped cleanly. The handwriting was tense, slanted, quite unlike Miss Lutterworth's own spidery cursive, which Whimsy had noted in the ledger. "Bunter," he said, almost conversationally, "who, in this pleasant nest of hymnals and hyacinths, would benefit from Miss Lutterworth being permanently removed from the catalogue, so to speak. That is a long list, my lord." She had made several corrections to the library's existing inventory, each carefully footnoted, but unflattering to the accuracy of past caretakers. Which is to say, someone resented her being cleverer than they. "So it would seem." "I suppose," Whimsy murmured, "there's no chance she simply died of piety." "None, my lord. The physician has examined the body. There are no marks, but her pupils are dilated, her extremities discolored. Poison is strongly suspected." "Poison, and not a mark upon her," Whimsy repeated, half to himself. "And a page torn and thrown away. There's a story in all that, Bunter, and a very unpleasant one." They were interrupted by Lady Plimpton's return, accompanied now by her son Lieutenant Desmond Plimpton, late of His Majesty's Navy. A square-shouldered youth with the slightly startled aspect of someone more accustomed to shouting at the wind than navigating domestic mysteries. He greeted Whimsy with a firm handshake and the forced smile of one unaccustomed to entertaining amateur detectives under his mother's wisteria. "Rotten show," said Desmond. "We've had the place for 300 years, and never so much as a decent burglary. But poisoned and unmanly way to kill someone, eh?" "I'm not sure murder has ever been accused of gallantry," replied Whimsy lightly, "though your ancestors may differ." Lady Plimpton interrupted with a touch of fretfulness. "Desmond, please, Lord Peter is helping, and the inspectors." "Due any moment," Desmond scowled. "There was a row last week," he said suddenly. "Euphemia and that fellow from the Antiquarian Society. Ashcroft. Row? She said he was forging dates in the registry, inflating the value of some pamphlets by making them seem pre-Commonwealth. Old rot, she had notes. Sod she'd report him." Whimsy brightened. "Now that's a motive with backbone. Intellectual snobbery and pecuniary gain. Lovely." He turned to Bunter, who was already scribbling. "Ashcroft, then. We must speak to him discreetly, and ask ourselves why Miss Lutterworth's final note, whatever it was, had to be torn up and binned." "But," said Lady Plimpton, faltering, "surely Mr. Ashcroft wouldn't. He's so very devoted to the Hall. He's here nearly every day. Never says a word out of place." Whimsy looked at her mildly. "My dear lady, I'm afraid one of the great pleasures of the English country house is how very politely people arrange to kill one another." And with that, he stepped over the broken pelargonium. Already envisioning the quiet interview to come, Whimsy found himself in the small, dimly lit drawing room where Mr. Leonard Ashcroft was already waiting, perched uneasily on the edge of a chintz-covered armchair as though prepared to bolt at the slightest hint of confrontation. The man was in his late 40s, with a neat mustache that looked as meticulously tended as the library's leather bindings, and eyes that flickered with something between irritation and apprehension. It was the sort of look that suggested a man who had mastered the art of polite disdain, but was unaccustomed to being scrutinized quite so thoroughly. Double quotes Mr. Ashcroft. Whimsy began, offering his usual courteous smile that masked an unyielding intellect. "I hear you have recently had some professional disagreements with Miss Lutterworth." Ashcroft's mouth twitched, as if he had considered lying but found it distasteful. "I wouldn't call it a disagreement, Lord Peter. More a difference of opinion on the cataloguing methods. Euphemia was precise to a fault. She insisted on strict adherence to facts rather than the tradition of the society, which, I admit, occasionally indulges in a certain poetic license." "Ah, poetic license," said Whimsy dryly. "A phrase I find highly suspect when it comes to history. and occasionally to murder. Ashcroft bristled. I assure you, Lord Peter, I had no quarrel with Euphemia personally. Our differences were purely academic, yet she threatened to report you for forgery. Whimsy's eyes narrowed slightly. The man's composure wavered. Yes, she believed I was falsifying dates on some pamphlets to increase their value. It was not true, of course. A misunderstanding, I assure you, but it caused some tension. Tension that might inspire desperate measures, said Whimsy, folding his hands. And yet, you were seen here at Thistlecombe Hall throughout last week? Yes, I was here daily, preparing a lecture on the sermons. Euphemia never made a fuss when I was about. Whimsy nodded thoughtfully. Did anyone notice if you and Miss Lutterworth had any altercations recently? Raised voices, heated arguments? Ashcroft hesitated. Once or twice, a raised word, but nothing extraordinary. Euphemia was difficult, I admit. Difficult women, said Whimsy, are the salt of the earth, and sometimes the bitterest of poisons. He smiled thinly. Ashcroft's eyes darted to the window as footsteps approached in the corridor. Bunter appeared, carrying a small leather-bound notebook. My lord, the constable requests your presence in the dining hall. There is a matter of some urgency. Of course, said Whimsy, rising. Thank you for your candor, Mr. Ashcroft. We may speak further. As Whimsy and Bunter made their way through the corridors, the hum of whispered speculation seemed to seep from the very walls of the hall. The dining hall was a cavernous space dominated by a long oak table set for an evening meal that no one appeared inclined to eat. Constable Sprake stood nervously beside the doorway, wringing his hands. My lord, he said, there's been an incident. Pray, do enlighten me, Whimsy replied. Sprake led him inside where Lady Plimpton and her son stood with the housekeeper and a tall, pale man whom Whimsy did not recognize. The man had the precise, quiet air of a clergyman, but his eyes were sharp and observant. This is Reverend Michael Staines, Lady Plimpton introduced. He's been visiting the parish from Exeter. Good evening, my lord, Staines said with a faint smile. Whimsy inclined his head. Good evening, Reverend. And what is the incident? Lady Plimpton spoke quickly, her voice tight with tension. The clock in the hall stopped striking shortly after Miss Lutterworth's body was found. But this evening, when the clock chimed at 9, it was followed by the sound of a door slamming downstairs. It startled us all. A slamming door, repeated Whimsy thoughtfully. Quite unusual in a house like this, where servants are generally discreet. And the clock? How reliable is it? The housekeeper answered promptly. The clock is ancient, but well cared for, sir. It's been known to falter on occasion, especially if the weights aren't wound properly. But I always see to it myself. Was it wound today? Mrs. Millet hesitated. Yes, in the morning. Who could have been near that door at 9 o'clock? The assembled company exchanged glances. Desmond Plimpton spoke up. I was in my room all evening. Mother was in the drawing room, and Mrs. Millet was preparing supper in the kitchen. Reverend Staines has only just arrived. Then who else is about? Whimsy mused. Reverend Staines smiled faintly. Lord Peter, I am afraid that some members of the household are not so attentive to their movements as one might hope. A door slamming in an old house can echo for minutes, and often one does not hear the footsteps that caused it. Very well. Whimsy folded his arms and looked about the room. This door, where is it? Lady Plimpton gestured toward a heavy oak door at the far end of the hall, partially obscured by a grand tapestry depicting a rather menacing-looking falcon. Would you be so kind as to unlock it, Mrs. Millet? The housekeeper moved to comply, producing a heavy key from her apron. The door creaked open to reveal a narrow passageway leading to the servants' quarters and the cellar beyond. Whimsy stepped inside, eyes adjusting quickly to the gloom. The stone floor was worn smooth, and the air smelled faintly of damp and old wine. Halfway down the passage, another door stood ajar, revealing the kitchen beyond. Wimsey raised his voice. "Bunter, do you hear anything unusual?" Bunter cocked his head. "Nothing but the ticking of a clock, my lord." "Curious," said Wimsey. "The clock you heard striking earlier was presumably the one above the hall. But there should be sudden noises here at 9 o'clock, unless someone is quite clumsy or very careless." Returning to the dining room, Wimsey addressed the group. "I intend to check the exact times of Miss Lutterworth's movements today and yesterday, to see if any pattern emerges that might explain this slamming door and the halted clock." Lady Plimpton's fingers tightened on the back of a chair. "I must confess, Peter, this whole affair unsettles me. Euphemia was such a steady presence, now this chaos. Chaos is merely the veil we call mystery until someone draws it aside," Wimsey replied. "And I propose to be that someone, though I make no promises about the curtains." Turning to Desmond, he said, "You mentioned you were in your room all evening. May I confirm the times?" "From 7 until 9:30, roughly." "I was reading by the window. Alone?" "Yes. Why?" "Nothing, merely verifying your alibi." "Lady Plimpton?" "In the drawing room with Reverend Staines until 10. "And Mrs. Millet?" "In the kitchen, preparing the meal with the cook." "Good," said Wimsey, tapping his fingers. "Bunter, fetch the gardener's boy. We must also clarify Miss Lutterworth's last known movements with him in detail." As Bunter went off to find Jonah Griggs, Wimsey's gaze settled on the portrait of the stern-faced ancestor above the mantelpiece, a man who looked as though he might disapprove of all this talk of poison and slamming doors. "Tell me," Wimsey said softly, "does Thistlecombe Hall have any secrets more ancient than its sermons?" Lady Plimpton smiled wanly. "More than one, I fear, but none so dark as this." Wimsey felt a familiar thrill, the faint chill of a case that promised to be as intricate as any ledger he had ever examined. Somewhere in the folds of polite conversation, ink-stained notes, and well-meaning lies lay a truth waiting patiently to be uncovered, and uncover it he would. Griggs was found near the back door, scrubbing at a stubborn patch of mud on his trousers with a worn piece of rag, the very picture of contrition and youthful awkwardness. He looked up with wide eyes as Wimsey approached, his gait hesitant and unsure. "Good evening, Jonah," Wimsey said in his customary suave manner, as if inviting the boy to tea rather than an interrogation. "I understand you were the last person to see Miss Lutterworth before her untimely demise?" Jonah nodded, biting his lip. "Yes, sir. I was bringing in some garden waste just before noon. She was in the study." "And did she say anything to you?" "Not much, sir. She looked real busy, writing notes and marking up some books. I thought she was a bit upset, but she didn't say why." Wimsey arched an eyebrow. "Upset, you say? Did she mention anyone who might have caused her distress?" Jonah scratched the back of his neck. "Not by name, sir. But she did mutter something about someone who couldn't be trusted." "Ah," Wimsey's voice was smooth but edged with interest. "And what time did you leave the study?" "About 10 minutes past 12, sir. I had to get back to the greenhouse before lunch." "Thank you, Jonah. That will do for now." As the boy scuttled away, Wimsey turned to Bunter. "We need a detailed timeline of Miss Lutterworth's movements yesterday and this morning. Particular attention to the moments around noon." Bunter nodded and retrieved his notebook. "I will begin with the kitchen and servant schedules." Lady Plimpton joined them, her usual composure slightly shaken. "If I may, Lord Peter, I think it worth mentioning that Euphemia had been quite agitated these past days. She confided in me once that she feared someone was tampering with the records." Wimsey's eyes twinkled faintly. "Indeed, it would appear the pen is mightier than the dagger in this case, at least initially, though sometimes, it seems, both are required." "And the catalogue?" Lady Plimpton asked anxiously. "Could it really hold such power?" "Every book in a library, dear lady, is a potential weapon, if wielded with sufficient malice. But first, we must establish the sequence of events." He gestured toward the window, where the sun was sinking behind the groves, casting the hall into a melancholy amber. "Bunter, if you would be so good as to interview the kitchen staff." Someone must have noticed the comings and goings during the crucial hours. Bunter set off and returned shortly with a young maid named Elsie, whose cheeks were flushed from the kitchen's warmth. She was hesitant but eager to please. "Miss Elsie," Whimsy began, "could you tell me where you were between 11 and 1 o'clock yesterday?" "I was mostly in the kitchen, sir, helping Mrs. Millet prepare lunch. Did you see Miss Lutterworth during that time?" "No, sir. She seemed to have shut herself in her study most of the morning. Did anyone come or go from the study?" "Only Jonah, the gardener's boy, sir. He brought in some plants around noon." Whimsy nodded. "And at any point, did you hear any unusual noises? Doors slamming, voices raised, anything out of the ordinary?" Elsie shook her head. "No, sir. Though sometimes the house can be creaky." "Creaky houses and creaky alibis," Whimsy muttered, "the staples of a detective's diet." As the conversation drew to a close, Whimsy's mind was already weaving threads. The study, a solitary figure, a torn note, a boy who saw anger but no words, a catalog in progress, each detail a stitch in the tapestry of this mystery. Later, as the household gathered reluctantly in the drawing room, the atmosphere thickened with unspoken questions. The vicar's widow, Mrs. Dalloway, was present now, her eyes sharp beneath her widow's veil, adding a layer of silent judgment to the proceedings. Whimsy allowed himself a small smile. "It seems, ladies and gentlemen, that Thistlecombe Hall is a place where the past clings like dust and secrets fester in quiet corners. Miss Lutterworth's death is not merely a tragedy, but a message one, written not in ink, but in fear and deceit." Desmond Plimpton's jaw clenched. "So who do you think did it?" Whimsy's eyes flicked over the assembled group with the faintest glint of irony. "I'm afraid, Lieutenant, the answer lies not in guesswork, but in patience and precision." "Tell me, Lady Plimpton," Whimsy continued, "do you know of any visitors who have arrived recently at Thistlecombe with cause to wish harm upon Miss Lutterworth?" She hesitated. "Only Reverend Staines. He came just last week, though no one knows him well." "Reverend Staines," Whimsy mused. "A new face in an old house is often a catalyst." The Reverend himself cleared his throat. "I assure you, Lord Peter, I came only to offer spiritual counsel to the family and assist with parish duties." "A noble calling," Whimsy said, "but even saints can harbor shadows." Suddenly, a sharp rap at the door announced the arrival of Inspector Foley, a man of robust build and businesslike manner, who wasted no time in surveying the group with a frank gaze. "Lord Peter Whimsy," he greeted. "I hear we have quite the tangled web here." Whimsy inclined his head. "Indeed, Inspector. And I trust you have begun your inquiries?" Foley nodded. "Yes, the staff are cooperative but tight-lipped, as always. There's been talk of a feud between Miss Lutterworth and Ashcroft, which you've already touched on." "Most promising," Whimsy said dryly, "though the obvious villain is often a veil for deeper intrigue." "Precisely," said Foley, "but I have to confess, the lack of a clear motive troubles me. There are no signs of forced entry or robbery." "Which suggests," Whimsy said slowly, "a crime of opportunity or passion concealed beneath layers of decorum." He turned to the group. "I propose that we examine the study itself, the scene of Miss Lutterworth's final hours, with the meticulous eye it demands." The party moved as one toward the study, where the fading light caught the dust motes and the cracked leather of a chair. Whimsy stepped inside, examined the desk, littered with papers, and the open ledger. The torn note was gone from the wastebasket, which now held only crumpled drafts and scraps. Whimsy's gaze drifted to the window, which stood slightly ajar despite the chill autumn air. "A curious detail," he muttered. "Miss Lutterworth must have left this open. But why? Was it to let in fresh air or to invite in a shadow?" Bunter bent to examine the floor beneath the window. "My lord, I see traces of faint footprints, damp and irregular. Someone came or went here in haste." Wimsey straightened, a flicker of triumph crossing his features. "Exactly, Bunter. And this hasty visitor may well hold the key to our mystery." Inspector Foley was already peering out into the garden beyond, nodding grimly. "I will have a search conducted at once." As the night deepened and the household retired to uneasy dreams, Wimsey remained at the study window, staring out at the tangled hedges and the encroaching shadows. Something told him the heart of this mystery was not in the obvious quarrels, or the bruised pride of antiquarians, but in the silent spaces between truth and deception. And in those spaces, Lord Peter Wimsey was determined to find his quarry. The following morning dawned gray and heavy with mist. A pall befitting the mood at Thistlecombe Hall, Lord Peter Wimsey, accompanied by Bunter and Inspector Foley, convened once again in the study, where the faint scent of stale tobacco and old paper lingered like ghosts. Wimsey's eyes rested on the slightly ajar window, now closed and secured by Bunter, his mind still circling the footprints discovered the previous evening. "Tell me, Inspector, what has the search of the grounds revealed?" Foley folded his arms with a look of restrained satisfaction. "We found something of interest near the east side hedge, an old key, tarnished but unmistakably a servant's key. It bears the same markings as those used in the cellar." "A key, no less," Wimsey murmured. "And no doubt the culprit wished it discarded far from the scene of the crime. The servants' passages and cellars of these estates are labyrinthine perfect for concealment." Bunter stepped forward with a leather-bound notebook. "My lord, I have completed interviews with the kitchen staff and the gardeners. There is a curious discrepancy concerning the whereabouts of a certain Mrs. Pritchard, the housemaid." "Do go on, Bunter." "Mrs. Pritchard claimed to have been in the laundry room from 11 until 1 yesterday. However, both the cook and the gardener state they did not see her during that time. Nor did she answer the kitchen bell when summoned shortly after noon." Wimsey's fingers drummed lightly on the desk. "Discrepancies such as this are seldom accidental. Bunter, we must verify Mrs. Pritchard's alibi." At that moment, the drawing-room door opened to admit a tall, slender woman with pinched features and sharp eyes. Mrs. Pritchard entered with a measured grace, though her hands trembled ever so slightly. "Double quotes, Mrs. Pritchard," Wimsey began. "I understand you were in the laundry room at midday yesterday." "Yes, Lord Peter, I was there all morning, as ordered. Yet others suggest you were not seen there. Can you account for your whereabouts between 11 and 1? The woman's eyes flickered. "I may have taken a brief walk outside to clear my head. The work is tiresome, and the house heavy with grief." "Did you encounter anyone during this walk?" "No, sir. The grounds were quiet." "Is there any reason you did not answer the kitchen bell at noon?" Mrs. Pritchard's lips tightened. "I was out of earshot." "Forgive me, Lord Peter." Wimsey regarded her thoughtfully. "Very well. One final question. Are you aware of any grievances Miss Lutterworth held against anyone here?" Mrs. Pritchard hesitated. She was worried about the catalogue's accuracy and feared some of the older servants were not entirely truthful. "Curious," Wimsey mused. "Truthfulness is a rare commodity in any household, madam." Mrs. Pritchard bowed stiffly and left the room, leaving Wimsey to ponder the threads of deceit winding through the servants' quarters. Later, in the library, Wimsey examined the catalogue itself, a meticulous ledger of sermons, manuscripts, and rare pamphlets. A particular entry caught his eye, a recent acquisition marked with a question, authenticity doubtful. He tapped the page with his finger. Here is a motive that transcends personal quarrels, the preservation of reputation or the concealment of fraud. Bunter looked up from the adjacent desk. "You suspect someone has been doctoring the collection?" "Precisely, and Miss Lutterworth discovered it." The door creaked, and Lady Plimpton entered, her expression grave. "Lord Peter, I must tell you something I overheard last night." Whimsy gestured for her to continue. "I was walking past the servants' hall when I heard voices low and angry. Ashcroft was confronting Mrs. Pritchard, accusing her of stealing from the library. A confrontation indeed," Whimsy said. "Did you catch the details?" Lady Plimpton shook her head. "Only that Mrs. Pritchard denied it vehemently and left in tears." "An accusation of theft would certainly provoke desperation," Whimsy murmured. "It fits our pattern of quiet malice beneath the veneer of civility." As the day wore on, Whimsy's inquiries led him to the cellars beneath the hall, dank and shadowed. The inspector and Bunter followed closely as Whimsy tested each lock with the newly found servant's key. At last, a heavy oak door gave way to reveal a cramped room lined with crates and dusty bottles. On a small table lay a bundle of papers, hastily concealed beneath a stained cloth. Whimsy lifted the cloth, revealing several forged documents, bearing dates and signatures that did not withstand his scrutiny. "Forgery," he declared, "and a very clumsy one at that." These falsified documents were intended to inflate the value of certain pamphlets, no doubt to the financial gain of the culprit. Inspector Foley frowned. "That would point directly to Ashcroft." "Indeed," Whimsy said. "But we must proceed with care. Motive alone is rarely sufficient for conviction." Returning upstairs, Whimsy requested a meeting with Ashcroft. The man appeared nervous, beads of sweat glistening on his brow. "Mr. Ashcroft," Whimsy began, "I have discovered forged documents hidden in the cellar." "Can you explain?" Ashcroft swallowed hard. I admit to altering some dates, but it was to protect the society's interests, not for personal gain. Yet Miss Lutterworth threatened exposure." "Yes, she was relentless." "And your whereabouts yesterday at the time of the murder?" Ashcroft glanced sideways. "In the library, preparing my lecture." "Alone?" "Yes. Can anyone confirm this?" Ashcroft hesitated, then shook his head. Whimsy's smile was thin. "That, Mr. Ashcroft, is a precarious alibi." He dismissed the man with a nod, then turned to Bunter. "We must verify Ashcroft's claim and examine any possible means he had to enter the study unseen." As twilight approached, Whimsy found himself drawn once again to the tapestry in the hall, the falcon's beady eyes seeming to watch his every move. "There is more to this house than meets the eye," he murmured. "And more to its inhabitants as well." Bunter, returning with news from the gardener, interrupted his reverie. "My lord, Jonah Griggs insists he saw a shadowy figure slipping from the study window around noon." "A shadowy figure," Whimsy echoed, a detail overlooked in the bustle of alibis and accusations. "Could it have been Mrs. Pritchard?" "Possibly," Whimsy mused, "or perhaps someone else altogether." He resolved to revisit the servants' quarters under the cover of darkness, where whispers held the secrets of a house unwilling to reveal its true face. As the evening chill deepened, Lord Peter Whimsy prepared to delve once more into the tangled web of Thistlecombe Hall, where every lie was a thread, and every truth a snare. As night deepened over Thistlecombe Hall, the mist thickened, draping the grounds in a spectral embrace. Lord Peter Whimsy found himself standing once more in the servants' quarters, a place usually brimming with quiet industry, now hushed and shadowed. The low murmur of voices was scarcely audible beneath the heavy oaks outside, but within, secrets stirred. Whimsy's glance fell on the familiar figure of Jonah Griggs, who lingered near the kitchen hearth, nervously tugging at the cuffs of his jacket. "You mentioned a shadowy figure near the study window around noon, Jonah," Whimsy said softly, drawing the boy's attention. "Tell me more about what you saw." Jonah swallowed hard, his youthful features pale in the flickering firelight. "I was just bringing some herbs to the kitchen garden, sir. I saw someone, tall, cloaked, slipping out through the study window. They moved quick, like they didn't want to be seen." "Did you recognize the person?" "No, sir. The cloak hid their face." Whimsy's eyes gleamed. "A cloak, you say? A classic method of concealment." Did you notice any distinguishing features? The gait, the shoes, anything unusual?" Jonah hesitated, then nodded. "The boots were muddy, but not from the garden. More like the path near the old gate." "Thank you, Jonah. Your observations are most useful." Turning to Bunter, Whimsy added, "We must have a discreet search along the old gate path. It might reveal where our mysterious visitor fled." Bunter saluted and departed at once to organize the search. Whimsy then approached the hearth and found Mrs. Pritchard standing nearby, her composure steadier in the gloom. "Mrs. Pritchard, you told me you took a walk during the time of the murder. Might you accompany me on a stroll around the grounds? There are questions only the night can answer." The woman nodded reluctantly, and together they stepped into the cold night air. The gravel crunched underfoot as they circled the house. Whimsy observed the windows, the faint shadows cast by swaying branches, and the subtle dips and rises of the earth. "Tell me, Mrs. Pritchard," he began, "are there any secret routes or passages known only to the staff?" Her eyes flickered toward the thick hedgerows. "There is an old service path near the east wing, but it's overgrown and rarely used." "Rarely used, you say? Yet someone could slip unseen along it, yes?" She nodded. "It is possible." They reached the old gate, its ironwork rusted and entwined with ivy. Whimsy knelt and inspected the ground, noticing faint impressions in the damp soil. Boot prints, fresh but muddied. "These do not match the garden paths," confirming Jonah's description. Mrs. Pritchard looked uneasy. Could they belong to Ashcroft? Whimsy smiled thinly. "A tempting thought, but speculation at this point. We must have evidence, not guesses." Returning inside, Whimsy found Inspector Foley waiting in the hall, face set in determination. "We've completed the search," Foley reported. "No sign of anyone fleeing the grounds, but we did find a torn fragment of fabric caught on the thorn bush near the gate." Whimsy took the fragment, noting its coarse weave and dark hue. "Likely part of a cloak," he mused, "but not one commonly worn by the household. Could this mean an outsider was involved?" Foley asked, "or someone attempting to appear so?" Whimsy moved toward the staircase, voice lowering to a confident tone. "It's beginning to seem our murder is not merely the outcome of domestic grievance, but of a far more intricate game, one that reaches beyond the walls of Thistlecombe Hall." The following morning brought no reprieve from the mystery. The household gathered again in the drawing room, each face etched with the strain of suspicion and whispered fears. Whimsy addressed the assembly. "Yesterday's revelations compel us to reconsider our assumptions. Forged documents and secret meetings suggest a calculated plot, but the true perpetrator remains concealed behind layers of misdirection." Lady Plimpton's eyes shimmered with worry. "Can we trust anyone? Lord Peter? Even those closest to us?" "Trust, madam," Whimsy replied, "is a currency that must be earned, not assumed." He turned toward Ashcroft, who sat uneasily near the fire. "Mr. Ashcroft, you claim to be in the library alone during the crucial hour. Is there no one who can vouch for your presence?" Ashcroft's face tightened. "No, Lord Peter, I was solitary." Whimsy's gaze sharpened. "And yet, your fingerprints were not found on the forged papers hidden in the cellar." "No, because I did not handle them, merely adjusted the catalog." Adjustments, alterations, a fine line indeed. At that moment, Bunter entered with a small parcel. "My lord, we received this morning. It was left anonymously at the front gate." Whimsy carefully untied the string, revealing a worn leather-bound diary. The initials E.L. were embossed faintly on the cover. He opened it, scanning the pages. The diary was filled with meticulous entries, chronicling Miss Lutterworth's work and fears. One passage caught his eye. October 12th. Suspicion grows that someone within the society has been tampering with records. I must tread carefully. Trust is a fragile thing. Another, October 15th. Received threats today. veiled warnings to cease my investigations or face consequences. The shadow lengthens. Whimsy's eyes met those of the assembled group. It appears Miss Lutterworth was aware of a threat far greater than mere academic disputes. The room was silent, save for the ticking of an ornate grandfather clock. Inspector Foley, Whimsy continued, we must find the author of those threats. The motive for murder is now clearer, silence enforced by fear. Foley nodded grimly. I will have the staff questioned again, with particular attention to any visitors or correspondence Miss Lutterworth may have received. Excellent, Whimsy said. And I intend to review the household's correspondence as well. Often, the pen wields greater power than the sword. That afternoon, Whimsy retreated to the study, poring over letters and telegrams from the past month. Most were mundane, but a particular letter stood out unsigned, typed with clipped menace. Cease your meddling in matters beyond your understanding. For your own good, desist. Whimsy read it twice, noting the paper's faint watermark, a rare stationery used by a local antiquarian society. He glanced at Bunter. A clue, Bunter. Our culprit's reach extends into learned circles. Later, during a quiet walk in the garden, Whimsy spoke with Laddie Plimpton. Do you know of anyone in the local antiquarian society who might bear ill will toward Euphemia? Lady Plimpton frowned. Only Mr. Gregory Finch. He was jealous of Euphemia's discoveries and feared she would eclipse his reputation. Whimsy smiled thinly. Jealousy is a poison well known to historians and murderers alike. That evening, under the shroud of dusk, Whimsy convened a discreet meeting with Inspector Foley and Bunter. We are closing in, Whimsy said. Our threads lead us to Finch and to the hidden resentments beneath polite society. Do you intend to confront him directly? Foley asked. Soon, but first, we must lay a trap, a reenactment of Miss Lutterworth's last day, to observe reactions and uncover inconsistencies. Bunter prepared the household schedule and timelines as Whimsy outlined the plan, assigning roles and rehearsing the sequence of events. As midnight approached, the players took their positions, servants, family, and suspects alike under the watchful eye of Lord Peter Whimsy. The stage was set for revelations, and the shadows of Thistlecombe Hall grew longer still. The faint glow of a crescent moon filtered through the leaded glass of the library windows, casting lattice-like shadows upon the polished floor. Lord Peter Whimsy stood quietly at the entrance, his gaze taking in the assembled group. They had been summoned to reenact the last known movements of Miss Euphemia Lutterworth on that ill-fated afternoon, an exercise in subtlety and observation. Each person wore the veneer of calm, but beneath simmered unease none more so than Gregory Finch, whose restless fingers betrayed a tension well beyond academic rivalry. Whimsy's voice, modulated to a tone of light amusement, broke the silence. Let us begin, shall we? I ask you all to recall as precisely as possible your whereabouts and actions from the hour before Miss Lutterworth's death until she was discovered. He paused, eyes sweeping the room. Mrs. Pritchard, you may start. The housekeeper's clear voice delivered a rehearsed recital of her errands and brief conversations with servants, but Whimsy's attention lingered on subtle gestures, an errant glance, a brief tightening of the jaw that hinted at more beneath the surface. As each witness recounted their story, inconsistencies began to prick like nettles against the fabric of the evening. When it came to Gregory Finch's turn, he was visibly uncomfortable. I was in my study, he stated curtly, avoiding eye contact, reviewing some notes for an upcoming lecture. Whimsy nodded thoughtfully. Alone, or was anyone else present? Alone, Finch replied, voice brittle. And did you hear anything unusual? Voices, footsteps, disturbances? Finch hesitated, then shook his head. No, the house was quiet. Whimsy's smile was a slow unfurling of a blade. Curious, given that Mrs. Pritchard recalls hearing a muffled thud near the east wing corridor, about the time Miss Lutterworth should have been returning from her walk. The suspect's eyes darted to the doorway. It must have been some other noise. Or a clever disguise, Whimsy mused, moving to the window to draw aside the curtain. The garden beyond was swathed in shadow, the night air crisp and still. We understand Miss Lutterworth left the house on foot, but it appears she never took the path she claimed. Lady Plimpton interjected quietly. I overheard Euphemia mention visiting the old folly near the ridge, an unusual detour, given her intended destination. Whimsy's gaze lingered on Lady Plimpton. And you find this information fortuitous? The lady shrugged with a faint, guarded smile. Only that it adds texture to the narrative, indeed. Whimsy turned back to Finch. Would you care to enlighten us about your own visits to the folly? Finch's face paled. I have not been there in some time. Yet, your boots bear traces of mud matching the ridge soil, Bunter observed crisply. Stepping forward with a small sample of dirt, found on Finch's shoes. Finch's composure cracked for an instant before he stammered. I must have stepped outside briefly yesterday. The room held its breath. Your presence there yesterday, Whimsy continued, coincides most inconveniently with Miss Lutterworth's last day. Finch's fingers switched, and for a fleeting moment, the academic veneer slipped to reveal something more raw, more human. Whimsy's attention then turned to the letter unsigned, the veiled threats that had come to light. Tell me, Mr. Finch, do you recognize this handwriting? The suspect shook his head, but Whimsy's eyes gleamed with quiet certainty. I believe the answer lies not in the letter's ink, but in the motive it conceals. A murmur rippled through the room. The tension was palpable. Whimsy's mind flicked back to the torn fragment of cloak, the mysterious figure glimpsed near the study window, and the muddy boots tracing a secret path. The web was tightening, but something remained elusive. Mrs. Pritchard, Whimsy said, you mentioned an overgrown service path near the east wing. Is it plausible that someone might use it to avoid detection? Entirely plausible, my lord. It skirts the main gardens and would allow passage unseen, save for a keen observer. Whimsy's lips quirked. A keen observer indeed, Mrs. Pritchard. It appears our shadowy visitor knew these grounds intimately. The housekeeper nodded solemnly, or was once part of this household. The room fell into thoughtful silence. Later that evening, while the household retired to uneasy slumber, Whimsy and Bunter moved silently through the corridors to the east wing. Here, the air was cooler, the echoes softer, as if the house itself held its breath. They paused before a narrow door, its paint chipped and dulled by time. Whimsy knelt and ran his fingers over the lock. This door leads to the service path. Notice the recent scuff marks, evidence of use. Bunter produced a small torch and shone its beam along the hallway. It's darker than I expected. A perfect route for someone wishing to escape notice. Whimsy pressed his ear to the door and listened. Faint sounds of the night-distant hoot of an owl, the rustle of leaves, but nothing more. Yet, the true secret, Whimsy said softly, is not just in where one walks, but who walks and why. Returning to his rooms, Whimsy began to piece together the mosaic of clues, the rivalries masked by polite smiles, the half-truths woven into alibis, and the silent accusations lingering in the air like smoke. In the days that followed, he pressed his inquiries with subtlety, framing questions with innocuous charm that elicited more than mere answers. Servants revealed nuances in the household routine. Minor details, such as the precise time the butler polished silverware or the discrepancy between the library clock and the hall clock, took on new significance. One afternoon, in conversation with Miss Tilly, the maid, Whimsy noted her frequent glances at the east wing door and asked casually about the household's routines. Oh, the master's study is quite particular, she said. But some nights, it's as if no one enters or leaves through the main doors. Intriguing, Whimsy murmured. Might there be another way in or out? Miss Tilly hesitated. There is a narrow passage behind the paneling in the library, but it's mostly Sealed off. Mostly, Whimsy repeated with a knowing smile. He requested access to the library paneling and, with Bunter's help, found a small latch hidden beneath a bookshelf. The panel slid open to reveal a narrow corridor, faintly smelling of dust and aged timber. The passage twisted and led directly to a small door in the east wing, precisely the route hinted at by Jonah's shadowy figure and the service path. Whimsy's mind raced. This secret passage explains the presence of our cloaked visitor, and perhaps the timing of the murder. Yet, questions remained. Who used this passage? For what purpose? And most critically, how does this align with the forged documents and the growing animosities? The following morning, Whimsy assembled the key players once more, his tone shifting from amused detachment to a more commanding presence. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "we are dealing not merely with a single act of violence, but a drama of concealment, deception, and old grudges. The secret passage, the forged papers, and the threatening letters are threads of the same tapestry." He fixed Gregory Finch with a steady gaze. "Your visits to the Folly and the East Wing passage suggest you had reasons to keep certain activities hidden." Finch paled but did not speak. Whimsy continued, "And yet, the missing salver from the dining room, forgotten you might think, is more than a mere trifle." "Salver?" Lady Plimpton questioned, surprised. Double quotes, "Yes. The silver tray used for serving drinks. Its absence is peculiar, as the butler insists it was last seen during the evening service. But no one can produce it now." "Perhaps stolen," muttered Ashcroft, "or used to conceal something." The inspector nodded. "A container, perhaps. For letters or documents." "Precisely." Whimsy turned toward Bunter. "Search the kitchens, the cellars, and the passageway. Every nook must be inspected." Hours later, Bunter returned, a small bundle carefully wrapped in linen in his hands. Whimsy untied it and revealed a set of papers, photocopies of Miss Lutterworth's research, but with subtle alterations. More forgeries, among them a letter addressed to a mysterious E, containing veiled threats and a demand to cease her inquiries. As Whimsy read, a chilling pattern emerged. The victim's research was being sabotaged by someone with intimate knowledge of the society's secrets and the household's layout. His thoughts coalesced like the fog outside. This is no longer a simple murder, but a meticulously orchestrated campaign to silence a woman who uncovered truths best left buried. He looked around the room, eyes settling on each suspect in turn, a quiet smile curling his lips. "The question remains, who among you feared Miss Lutterworth's revelations enough to commit murder?" The silence stretched, the house seeming to hold its breath. Whimsy's mind, ever a chessboard of possibilities, was closing in on the final moves. The gathered assembly was heavy with unspoken tension, and Whimsy, master of that curious British art of polite discomfort, let the silence stretch just long enough for the room to grow restive before he spoke again. "Before we proceed," he said, fingers steepled beneath his chin, "let us consider the psychology of our perpetrator. This is not merely a crime of opportunity, but one of desperation and calculation, committed by someone deeply invested in suppressing the truth, I might add, that Miss Lutterworth was perilously close to exposing." He glanced at Gregory Finch, who shifted uneasily beneath the steady scrutiny. "You, Mr. Finch, have demonstrated a particular zeal in discrediting Euphemia's research. The discrepancies in your account, the evidence of your footprints on the ridge soil, and your unconvincing denial of visiting the Folly all speak to a motive beyond academic rivalry." Finch's face reddened, but before he could respond, Lady Plimpton interjected smoothly, "Might I remind everyone that scholarly disagreements are hardly uncommon in these circles. To leap to accusations of murder without concrete proof does no credit to any of us." "Quite right, Lady Plimpton," Whimsy acknowledged with a nod. "Which is why I invite each of you to reflect carefully on what you know, what you suspect, and what you may have overlooked." He turned to the inspector, who had been quietly taking notes. "Inspector Ashcroft, may I remind you that haste in condemning Mr. Finch risks obscuring other possibilities. There are, after all, multiple persons with access to the secret passage, and more than one with reason to fear Miss Lutterworth's inquiries." Ashcroft inclined his head, his expression unreadable. "Of course, my lord. We are proceeding with caution." Whimsy returned his attention to the assembled company. "Mrs. Pritchard, you've been most helpful. Yet, I wonder if you can clarify one point, the timing of the disappearance of the silver salver. The butler insists it vanished during evening service, but if that is so, how do you account for the fresh scratches on the passageway door?" The housekeeper looked startled, but composed herself quickly. I can only suppose that someone took it through this secret passage, perhaps to conceal letters or documents, as you suggested earlier." "Precisely," Whimsy said, "and it is the movement through this passage that we must now scrutinize closely. Mr. Bunter, have you completed your inspection of the kitchens and cellars?" "Yes, my lord. I found nothing unusual except for a slight disarray behind the pantry, a few missing jars, and a faint trace of tobacco ash." "Tobacco ash?" Whimsy mused aloud. "Who among us is a smoker?" Gregory Finch flushed again. "I occasionally smoke a pipe." "Indeed, another thread to follow," Whimsy murmured. The conversation turned towards the curious absence of a key figure, Jonah. Since the shadowy glimpse near the study window, he had been notably absent from the group, an absence that did not escape Whimsy's notice. "Has anyone seen Mr. Jonah today?" Whimsy inquired, arching an eyebrow. Lady Plimpton's lips tightened. "He left early this morning, claiming urgent business in the village." "An urgent matter, no doubt," Whimsy said dryly. "And do we know the nature of this business?" "Merely errands, I believe," she replied, eyes averted. Whimsy exchanged a glance with Ashcroft. "We should investigate Mr. Jonah's movements forthwith. His sudden departure is, at the very least, suspicious." As if summoned by the suggestion, a faint knock came at the door. A young servant entered, bearing a telegram. Whimsy took it and scanned its contents quickly. "Mr. Jonah has been detained at the village police station for questioning. Brought in regarding a disturbance at the market square," Whimsy read aloud. "A coincidence or something more?" The inspector nodded grimly. "We will dispatch a team immediately." With the room's focus briefly diverted, Whimsy took a moment to peruse the letters found by Bunter. The veiled threats and forged documents painted a picture of a campaign to sabotage Miss Lutterworth's work, but more importantly, they betrayed knowledge of the secret passage and the household's intimate details. It occurred to him that whoever wrote the letters had access to personal information unavailable to most, a detail that narrowed the field of suspects considerably. Double quotes Mrs. Pritchard, Whimsy said. "Are you aware if anyone in the household keeps a journal or diary?" The housekeeper blinked. "Miss Euphemia herself maintained a journal, my lord. It was kept in her study." "Ah," Whimsy smiled faintly. "The study where the shadow was seen." He requested the key to the study, and with Bunter's assistance, carefully examined the room. It was immaculate, yet a faint disturbance near the writing desk caught Whimsy's eye, a slight shift in the dust pattern. An out-of-place book. He carefully removed a loose floorboard, revealing a small metal box. Inside lay Miss Lutterworth's journal, its pages filled with meticulous notes and observations. Whimsy read, his brow furrowing at passages describing an anonymous source, referred to only as E, who had promised to reveal the true history of Thistlecombe. A sudden noise startled him, footsteps approaching. He hastily closed the journal as the study door opened, revealing Lady Plimpton. "I hope I am not intruding," she said, voice smooth as silk, "though it seems I am just in time." Whimsy regarded her calmly. "Lady Plimpton, I trust your presence here is purely incidental," she smiled faintly. "One can hardly be certain in a house such as this." but I came to retrieve some personal effects from Euphemia's room. Of course, you may proceed." As she left, Whimsy's mind turned again to the journal's contents. The reference to E was a cipher, a clue pointing to someone with knowledge of the family's buried secrets. The secret passage, the forged documents, and the veiled threats all suggested a motive rooted in inheritance, pride, or vengeance. He recalled the quiet but firm manner in which Lady Plimpton had steered the conversation earlier, the subtle hints dropped like breadcrumbs. Could she be the E in question? As night deepened, Whimsy convened a private conference with Bunter and Inspector Ashcroft. "We are dealing with a calculated adversary, someone skilled in misdirection and familiar with the inner workings of this household," Whimsy said. Lighting a cigarette and exhaling thoughtfully, "Lady Plimpton's presence in the study at this hour is no mere coincidence." Ashcroft nodded. "I agree, my lord. Her composure is impressive, but her motives remain unclear." Bunter spoke quietly. "Shall we arrange a discreet surveillance to observe who accesses the secret passage during the night?" "Precisely," Whimsy replied. "If we are to unmask the culprit, we must catch them in the act." Under cover of darkness, a small party stationed themselves near the concealed entrance behind the library panel. Hours ticked by with the silence broken only by the distant call of a nightjar. Suddenly, a shadow moved slender, deliberate. The figure paused, glanced around, then slipped through the panel into the passageway. Whimsy's heart quickened. The pursuit was silent. Measured, the figure emerged in the east wing corridor and moved toward the study. Whimsy stepped forward, voice calm yet edged with finality. "You are quite far from bed, Lady Plimpton." Caught, she turned slowly, an enigmatic smile curving her lips. "Lord Peter, I was wondering when you would discover my nocturnal habits. No doubt your explanations will be as compelling as your company," Whimsy quipped dryly. "Come, let us speak where all may hear." Back in the drawing room, under the watchful eyes of all present, Lady Plimpton's mask began to slip. The calm facade cracked, revealing a tangle of motives: fear of scandal, a desperate attempt to preserve the family name, and a secret alliance with Mr. Jonah that had turned sour. Whimsy laid out the chronology with precision: the forged letters, the secret passage, the timing of the Salver's disappearance, all converging to expose her as the architect of the elaborate deception. "You feared Miss Lutterworth's revelations would sully your reputation and inheritance," Whimsy said softly. "Your threats, your manipulations, and ultimately, your violence were born of that fear." Lady Plimpton's eyes glittered with defiance. "You think you understand, but you know nothing of the sacrifices made for family." "Perhaps," Whimsy replied, "but I do know that no family is worth a life." Her resolve faltered. "I did what was necessary." "Necessity, Lady Plimpton, is not a license for murder." The inspector stepped forward, cuffing the now silent lady. "You will have your chance to explain all in due course." As the household settled into a stunned silence, Whimsy allowed himself a moment's reflection. The pieces had fallen neatly into place, not through force or bluster, but through the patience of observation, the rigor of logic, and the unyielding pursuit of truth. And yet, as he prepared to leave Thistlecombe Hall, he mused quietly to Bunter, "There is a certain poetry in the manner of the reveal, like a stage play's final act, where all masks are torn away." Bunter smiled. "Shall I ready the car, my lord?" Whimsy lit another cigarette, his gaze lingering on the darkened hall. "Yes, Bunter. And let us hope that in the morrow's light, the scandal at Thistlecombe will rest, buried with the secrets it unearthed." The morning sun, pale and reluctant, filtered through the leaded windows of Thistlecombe Hall, casting long, wavering shadows across the once celebratory drawing room. The air was thick with a peculiar quiet, a sort of brittle calm that follows the storm of revelation, when the initial tumult has subsided, but the wounds remain painfully fresh. Lord Peter Whimsy, standing by the hearth, surveyed the assembled family and servants with a gaze as precise as a surgeon's scalpel, quietly assessing the aftershocks of the previous night's drama. Lady Plimpton sat in a high-backed chair, her hands folded tightly in her lap, a fragile figure of regal composure now tinged with the unmistakable hue of defeat. The butler, Mr. Bunter, maintained his usual impeccable stance near the door, his expression unreadable but alert. Inspector Ashcroft had taken a discreet seat by the window, notebook resting upon his knees, his eyes flicking over the scene with professional detachment. Whimsy cleared his throat, the faintest curl of a smile touching his lips. It seems, after all, that truth, like the dawn, is difficult to resist, though it may arrive in stages. His tone was dry, lightly ironic. Yet the weight of his words carried a gravity that silenced the room. He turned to the assembled company. Before we proceed with the formalities of Lady Plimpton's detainment, there remain several questions, unanswered details that demand elucidation, lest we consign ourselves to a superficial understanding of events. He fixed his gaze on Gregory Finch, whose pallor had deepened overnight. "Mr. Finch, I believe you owe us a clearer account of your involvement in last evening's events. Your reluctance to admit certain facts has complicated the investigation, though I am willing to afford you the opportunity to explain." Finch swallowed audibly and straightened. "Very well, my lord. I admit that I visited the Folly that evening, though not with ill intent. I intended only to confront Miss Lutterworth, to persuade her to desist from her inquiries into family history, which I believe to be misguided and potentially damaging to us all." Whimsy's lips twitched. "An admirable motive, if somewhat heavy-handed. And yet, you left no indication of your presence, save for your footprints on the ridge soil and the scarf found tangled among the ivy." "I was rash," Finch conceded. "I did not foresee the consequences." Rashness, Whimsy mused, often a harbinger of disaster in these matters. Turning to the inspector, Whimsy requested, "Inspector Ashcroft, might I remind you to verify Finch's whereabouts during the critical hours following his departure from the Folly? We must confirm if his timeline holds under scrutiny." Ashcroft inclined his head. "Already underway, my lord." The conversation shifted naturally to the enigmatic Mr. Jonah, whose earlier absence had raised eyebrows. "We learned last night that Mr. Jonah was detained at the village police station on unrelated charges," Whimsy noted, though his proximity in time and place to the murder remained suspicious. Lady Plimpton raised a delicate eyebrow. "Mr. Jonah's associations have long been a cause for concern, though I would caution against conflating unrelated misdemeanors with murder." Whimsy's eyes gleamed with mild amusement. "A prudent warning, Lady Plimpton. Yet in a puzzle such as this, no thread, however tangled, may be dismissed without due examination." Bunter, stepping forward, produced a small bundle of papers from his immaculate jacket pocket. "My lord, during last night's vigil, I discovered a series of letters concealed beneath a loose stone in the garden wall near the secret passage entrance." Whimsy took the letters, his eyes scanning the spidery handwriting. Correspondence between Lady Plimpton and an unknown correspondent, reference to the matter, and veiled threats against Miss Lutterworth. "Fascinating." He read aloud a particularly chilling passage. "She must be silenced, at any cost. The past must remain buried, lest it unravel everything." "That confirms our suspicions," Whimsy said softly. "But it also raises new questions. Who is this correspondent, and what secrets lie at the heart of the matter?" Lady Plimpton's composure faltered momentarily. "I do not recall authoring these letters," she declared, voice tight. "Indeed," Whimsy murmured, "forged letters are the most treacherous of all. Crafted to deceive and manipulate, they point to an intelligence as cunning as it is desperate." The inspector interjected, "Might we consider the possibility of a third party, someone who benefits from sowing discord and confusion?" Whimsy nodded thoughtfully. "A distinct possibility. Our investigation must therefore extend beyond the obvious suspects to encompass all, with knowledge of the household's secrets." He returned to the journal recovered from Miss Lutterworth's study. The reference to E. the anonymous source suggests a wider conspiracy. Euphemia was no mere scholar, but a hunter of truth in a den of shadows. The room fell silent as everyone digested this. Suddenly, a sharp rap at the door announced the arrival of a telegram from the village. "Constable." Whimsy took the note and read aloud. "Further inquiries have uncovered a witness who observed a figure resembling Lady Plimpton near the Folly on the night in question, earlier than previously admitted. This contradicts her statement that she was elsewhere." Lady Plimpton's lips tightened into a thin line. "I can only suggest a mistake or misidentification." "An assertion easily tested," Whimsy said crisply. "Though the contradictions pile, it is the minutiae that will topple the house of cards." He turned his attention to the clock on the mantelpiece, noting the slight misalignment of the minute hand with the hour markers. "Might I ask, Mr. Bunter, if the clocks in this house are all regularly synchronized?" Bunter nodded. "We endeavor to maintain them, my lord, though some require adjustment after the last repairs." "Precisely," Whimsy said. "An unsynchronized clock may serve as a convenient alibi or an overlooked clue." He pulled from his pocket the small scrap of fabric found near the secret passage door. The distinctive pattern matched the lining of Lady Plimpton's evening gown. Lady Plimpton's eyes flickered with a brief flare of alarm. "I have no explanation for that." "Yet you admit to being near the passage," Whimsy pressed. "No. Then who?" he asked softly. The weight of silence answered him. Whimsy's thoughts returned to the secret passage itself, the ingenious engineering of a family seeking to hide not only treasures, but skeletons in their closets. The grooves worn into the floorboards, the faint traces of recent dust disturbances, the peculiar absence of cobwebs all spoke to its use, frequent and purposeful. Who else, Whimsy wondered aloud, would have access and motive? The servants, too, live under the same roof and eyes. His gaze met that of Mrs. Pritchard, the housekeeper. She avoided his eye, fingers twitching nervously. "Mrs. Pritchard," Whimsy said gently, "you were among the first to discover the body. Might I ask if anything seemed amiss in the household in the days leading to Miss Lutterworth's death?" She hesitated, then spoke in a low voice. "There was tension, my lord. Whispers among the staff about secret meetings, furtive glances, and Master Gregory's increasingly bitter attitude." "Furtive meetings? Between whom?" She glanced toward Lady Plimpton before answering. "I believe between Miss Euphemia and the gardener, Mr. Jonah. They spoke in hushed tones behind the stables." "That would explain much," Whimsy mused. "A liaison, perhaps, or a conspiracy." The inspector noted the information carefully. "We will need to interview Mr. Jonah again upon his release." Whimsy's mind pieced together the tangled web, a secret romance, forged letters, concealed passages, and shifting loyalties. The theater of Thistlecombe was populated not merely by players, but by double agents in a drama of inheritance and betrayal. As the day wore on, Whimsy spent hours retracing the steps of all involved, reconstructing timelines with meticulous care. The village clock tower struck noon as he concluded that only one person could have committed the murder with the knowledge and access required, a person familiar with the secrets buried deep beneath Thistlecombe's veneer of civility. Yet who, beyond Lady Plimpton, bore the darkest motives? Just as he was about to share his theory with Ashcroft and Bunter, the inspector interrupted with urgent news. Mr. Jonah had confessed in part. He admits to having met with Miss Lutterworth the night she died, Ashcroft reported, and to a quarrel, but denies involvement in the murder itself. He claims that Lady Plimpton coerced him into delivering the forged letters and threatened him should he reveal the truth. Whimsy's expression sharpened. A tangled web indeed. Coercion, lies, and fear. The psychological underpinnings are as complex as the physical clues. He lit a cigarette and exhaled slowly. Our task remains to separate truth from artifice, to strip away the layers of deception until only one clear narrative remains. Outside, the wind rose, rattling the window panes with a hollow, whispering breath, as if the house itself exhales. A secret yet to be fully revealed. Whimsy looked toward the gathering dusk and murmured, "The final act is near." And I suspect that tonight, the truth will no longer remain hidden in the shadows of Thistlecombe Hall. As twilight deepened into a velvety dusk, the ancient timbers of Thistlecombe Hall seemed to creak with a restless anticipation, as if the very walls were leaning in to overhear the denouement of a drama years in the making. Lord Peter Wimsey, his sharp features softened by the glow of the fireplace, stood quietly surveying the assembled company once more. The air was thick with the residue of confession, suspicion, and an almost palpable tension that clung like a second skin to every occupant of the room. The inspector had just returned from speaking with Mr. Jonah, whose partial confession had left more questions than answers, and Wimsey's mind was whirring with the myriad threads yet to be woven into a coherent tapestry. "Inspector Ashcroft," Wimsey began, his voice calm but commanding, "I believe it is time we convene a full account of the evening's events, each witness to speak in turn, with my assistance to unravel the chronology in precise detail." Ashcroft nodded, his pen poised, while the others exchanged glances, some wary, others resigned. Wimsey motioned first to Lady Plimpton, who sat with the grace of a fading queen, eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Your ladyship, you have maintained a certain narrative thus far. Yet, as I peruse the letters and Mr. Jonah's testimony, I find discrepancies that require clarification. Will you recount your movements from the hour of 6 until 10 last evening?" Lady Plimpton inhaled slowly, the faint scent of lavender mingling with the tobacco smoke. "I was in my sitting room, receiving visitors. Mr. Finch arrived at 6:30, as I mentioned. We discussed family affairs until he departed around 8. Thereafter, I retired to my chambers, where I remained until I heard the alarm." Wimsey's eyes narrowed, though his tone remained courteous. "Were there no interruptions? No one else calling upon you during that time?" "No," she replied firmly. "None whatsoever." Wimsey's glance flickered briefly to the clock, its hands frozen at 9:15. "A shame the clock stopped, though a convenient alibi, perhaps. Might I inquire, Lady Plimpton, if you noticed any irregularities in the household clocks last evening?" She hesitated, a flicker of doubt crossing her face. "Now that you mention it, the clock in the hall struck 9 twice in quick succession, which I found odd." "Precisely," Wimsey said softly. "A subtle manipulation of timekeeping, a small detail with significant implications. Next." He addressed Gregory Finch, whose earlier evasions had not gone unnoticed. "Mr. Finch, your visit to Miss Lutterworth's Folly has been established. Pray, explain your purpose and the nature of your discourse with Miss Lutterworth." Finch swallowed and rubbed his hands nervously. "I wish to dissuade her from pursuing family matters that could unsettle our inheritance." She was determined, however, and our discussion became heated. "And your departure?" "I left shortly after 8, Finch said, avoiding Wimsey's gaze. "Alone?" "No," Wimsey interjected gently. "You were accompanied?" "Yes, by Mr. Jonah." The room stirred with murmurs. "Mr. Jonah," Wimsey continued, "your involvement deepens. Please, enlighten us on your role." Jonah, seated near the door, spoke with a rough, hesitant voice. "I met Miss Lutterworth that night as usual, but the quarrel with Mr. Finch was new. Afterwards, Lady Plimpton approached me with requests that involved the forged letters, I take it?" Wimsey pressed. Jonah nodded. "She said it was for the good of the family. I was to deliver them discreetly, or face consequences." "An excellent example of coercion," Wimsey said, folding the letters carefully. "Yet, Did Lady Plimpton have motive to silence Miss Lutterworth permanently? Lady Plimpton's eyes flashed dangerously. I deny any such intention. Whimsy raised a hand, forestalling further protest. Of course, we proceed on evidence, not declarations. He then directed attention to Mrs. Pritchard, the housekeeper. Madam, you mentioned secret meetings and whispered conversations. Can you specify dates and participants? She nodded slowly. Most nights in the week before the incident. Miss Lutterworth and Mr. Jonah, mostly, but Lady Plimpton was seen pacing near the gardens late at night. Whimsy's brow arched. The gardens and more pertinently, the secret passage. Pray, what can you tell us about its recent use? The dust was disturbed, Mrs. Pritchard replied. And I found a pair of gloves, ladies' gloves, beside the concealed door. Whimsy took from his pocket the gloves, matching the embroidery to Lady Plimpton's usual style. An unfortunate oversight, he observed. The passage clearly played a role. At this juncture, Whimsy requested a reenactment of the timeline. Each witness was asked to specify their whereabouts, down to the minute, piece by piece. The fabric of their alibis began to fray. Lady Plimpton's assertion of being alone from 8 until 10 was contradicted by Jonah's claim that she approached him shortly after Finch's departure at 8. Finch himself admitted leaving after 8 with Jonah, yet village testimony placed Jonah near the Folly at 10. Whimsy's voice remained steady, but his eyes glittered. There is a temporal impossibility here. One cannot be in two places at once, yet these statements suggest precisely that. He motioned to Ashcroft. Inspector, a thorough check of the household and grounds for hidden clocks or timekeeping devices might yield insight. As the inspector noted the instruction, Whimsy drew all eyes to the fireplace. The murder weapon was found in the Folly, a dagger, ornate but not uncommon in the household's collection. Yet there was no blood on the handle, indicating the murderer used gloves or cleaned it thoroughly. He paused for effect, yet the most telling evidence lies in the footsteps. Whimsy pulled from his notebook a detailed sketch of the muddy prints around the Folly's grounds. Notice the prints show a limp, a subtle unevenness that our suspects fail to account for. Who among us walks with such a gait? The room fell silent. Bunter stepped forward, his voice measured. Only Lady Plimpton has mentioned a slight lameness from an old injury. Lady Plimpton's composure cracked momentarily, a ghost of a smile flickering. That injury is hardly news. Indeed, Whimsy agreed. But it is a clue. A clue that places you near the scene at the precise moment of the crime. He turned sharply to her. Lady Plimpton, why was your scarf found snagged among the ivy on the Folly's wall? Her eyes narrowed. Accident. An accident that seems to defy the rest of your statements. At last, Whimsy raised his hand to quell the murmurs. It is time to address the heart of the matter. He paced slowly before the group. Miss Lutterworth was an obstinate seeker of truth, unearthing secrets that others wished to keep buried. She threatened to expose past sins which, if revealed, would have dismantled reputations and fortunes alike. His gaze settled on Lady Plimpton. Your carefully maintained facade conceals a desperate resolve to protect what is yours. Lady Plimpton rose, her voice trembling but defiant. You have no proof. On the contrary, Whimsy said, we have a confluence of evidence, the forged letters, your presence near the Folly, the manipulated clocks, the distinctive limp in the footprints, and your coercion of Mr. Jonah. He let the words hang in the air, then concluded quietly, you killed Miss Lutterworth to silence her investigations. For a moment, Lady Plimpton's resistance faltered. Her eyes darted around the room, seeking escape. Then, with a weary sigh, she sank back into her chair. Perhaps I am guilty, she whispered. But understand this, it was to protect my family from ruin, from disgrace. Whimsy inclined his head, the faintest expression of sympathy crossing his features. In such matters, one often finds that guilt is but a shadow cast by fear and love. Inspector Ashcroft moved forward to place the cuffs upon her wrists. his tone respectful but firm. As Lady Plimpton was led away, Whimsy addressed the remaining guests. Let this be a lesson in the perils of secrecy and the inevitability of truth's pursuit. He lit a final cigarette and cast a glance around the room, now heavy with relief and remorse. To quote Shakespeare, he murmured, "Truth is truth to the end of reckoning, and it is reckoning we have reached." Outside, the night deepened, and the ancient house seemed to exhale, its long-held secrets laid bare at last. The flickering candlelight cast wavering shadows across the library walls as Lord Peter Wimsey settled into his accustomed chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin. The assembly of Thistlecombe Hall's denizens sat tense and expectant, the heavy silence broken only by the occasional crackle from the hearth. Outside, the evening mist thickened, wrapping the ancient estate in a shroud worthy of its secrets. "I trust I have not kept you in suspense too long," Whimsy began, his voice a blend of geniality and steel, "though the nature of truth is that it is not always swift to reveal itself." He allowed a brief pause, casting a glance toward Inspector Ashcroft, who sat with a furrowed brow and a notepad bristling with observations. "Let us recapitulate, shall we? We have a house suffused with undercurrents of resentment, secrets, clinging as stubbornly as the ivy on its walls. A victim, Miss Lutterworth, tenacious and inconvenient, whose inquiries threatened to unravel more than a few carefully woven lies." He inclined his head toward Lady Plimpton, who sat with a fragile composure, her eyes betraying the strain beneath the practiced mask. "You, madam, were desperate to protect what remained of your family's standing. The forged letters, the manipulation of clocks, and the darkened corridors of that folly were all instruments in your endeavor to forestall ruin." Lady Plimpton's gaze dropped, but Whimsy was not finished. "Yet there remains a piece that does not fit so neatly into this mosaic one, that at first glance appeared a mere trifle. The discrepancy in the timeline surrounding Mr. Jonah's movements, the peculiar limp in the footprints, and the silent sentinel of the half-open window in the folly." He leaned forward, eyes bright. "Mr. Jonah, your testimony was the linchpin to unraveling this knot, but it was also your silence that nearly allowed the true culprit to slip through the net." Turning to the stooped figure near the door, Whimsy's tone was unexpectedly kind. "You admitted to delivering forged letters under duress, yet you failed to mention the crucial fact of your own involvement in Miss Lutterworth's final hours." Jonah's face paled. Whimsy smiled thinly. "You see, it was not Lady Plimpton who wielded the dagger, but you, compelled by a mixture of fear and loyalty. You chose to silence Miss Lutterworth when the stakes became too perilous." The room stirred with disbelief. "Consider the evidence," Whimsy continued. "The limp evident in the muddy footprints matches your slight hitch, not Lady Plimpton's. The glove found at the folly bore traces of a callus consistent with your work as a gardener and errand boy." Jonah's shoulders slumped. I meant no harm. She threatened to expose everything. And in doing so," Whimsy said softly, "you became the instrument of tragedy." He turned once more to Lady Plimpton. "Your role was that of a conspirator, seeking to misdirect suspicion, yet the knife belonged to one more closely bound to the estate's soil." Inspector Ashcroft stepped forward, nodding grimly. "Mr. Jonah, you are under arrest for the murder of Miss Lutterworth." The gardener's resistance melted away, and he was gently but firmly taken into custody. Whimsy rose, straightening his cuffs. "Justice, though sometimes slow, is as inexorable as the turning of the seasons." As the guests absorbed the revelation, he added with a wry smile, "It is often the smallest detail, the misplaced clock hand, the overlooked limp that illumines the darkest corners." The household seemed to breathe once more, the burden of suspicion lifting like morning fog. Why approached the window, looking out into the murky gardens. "Thistlecombe Hall will, I hope, find peace at last. And for all its ghosts, may the future be a little less haunted." With a final glance at the assembled company, he offered a parting quip. As Hamlet might have said, "The readiness is all." In this case, the readiness to observe, to question, and most importantly, to understand the human heart. And, with that, Lord Peter Wimsey donned his coat, tipped his hat, and vanished into the mist, leaving behind the echoes of a scandal unraveled by nothing more than logic, wit, and a profoundly humane insight into the frailties of those bound by blood and circumstance.